Hi, welcome to my studio. I'm Stephanie Blythe, and I've been a doll artist for almost 40 years. I thought you might like to see a little bit around my studio before we begin. So this is my vision board. This is where I put everything that kind of inspires me for what I'll be working on in the next couple of months. And this is just my bookshelf and dolls that I collect from friends or my dolls. It's just kind of a mishmash. I originally started out studying illustration. I wanted to be a children's book illustrator, and I went to the Philadelphia College of Art, which is now called the University of the Arts. I wanted to do fantasy illustrations, but I really didn't like the courses, so I ended up transferring into textile design, and so I graduated with a major in textile design, and ended up working for Vera Newman. Some of you may remember Vera Sheets and Scarves. I worked for her for about 2 years, and then ended up being married and having children, and lived in rural Maryland, where I started making dolls, mainly fairies, with Susan Snodgrass, and we worked together for about 16 years. And then I ended up remarrying and moving to California, and I now live in San Anselmo, California, and work pretty much on my own. And so here we are. Today I'm going to talk about how you can use fabric in your dolls and different things that you can do to change the fabric, because today in our modern age a lot of fabrics are made out of polyester and synthetics. It's kind of difficult to find the kind of fabrics that you want. I use a lot of antique fabrics in my work just because I love the colors. They're so mellow. I love the fabric. But oftentimes I'll use new fabric. I'm going to talk about natural fibers versus synthetic fibers, and identifying age and what type of fiber it is. I like to use natural fibers for my dolls because they flow freely. Synthetic fibers are made out of, are petroleum based, where natural fibers are made out of natural things. Rayon is a wood product. Silk is from a silkworm. Those are all natural things. The first thing that you might want to do is try and figure out the age of your textile that you have, because that'll help you identify whether it's a natural fiber or not. This is some slipper satin. It is only 27 inches wide. You'll notice that I have this ruler on my table. When you go to IKEA, they give you these paper rulers, and I tape one down to my work table. That way I have an automatic tape measure. But you could also just tape down a regular ruler, but it comes in very handy. So this is 17 inches, and we know that up until 1935, everything was made from natural fibers. And in about 1935, they started using oil-based textiles. So this is definitely from before 1920, probably, because of the width of it. Another way that you can test your fabric is by the burn test. Always be away from your smoke alarm and have some water handy. So I'm going to light this and I'm going to burn it. and I get a soft edge, and it smells like burning hair. So that tells me that it is a natural fiber. This lace, when it was sold to me, I was told that it was a natural fiber. But once I got it home and I burned it, you can see that it doesn't burn very fast, and it has a ball that's hard. That means that has some polyester in it, which also means that it won't absorb water, so it's not suitable for dyeing. And because today we're going to do some dyeing, we want to know that everything that we're dyeing is a natural fiber, because a synthetic is going to resist the dye, it won't absorb it, and it won't work with the dyes that we're using today. There are some dyes and there are some things that you can soak a synthetic fabric in and it'll work, but we're not going to do that today. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the pins that you use. I don't just use a regular straight pin, especially because my work is so small. A lot of my work is miniature. If I put this pin into a piece of silk fabric, it will make a big scar. So I like to use either pleating pins or silk pins. But for really delicate work, I use these pins. You can see that how tiny they are, and those are butterfly pins, and they're used for mounting butterflies. And they're really small, and they barely make a mark in your silk or whatever you're using. I'll have a source list at the end of this that you can find out where to get these. Another thing that I find quite useful is this little needle called a big eye. And basically what this needle is that it's two pieces of very thin piano wire that have been soldered together on each end. So it's either called a big eye needle, and you can get it from Beadsmith. And I find this very useful. If I can't get my thread through my really thin needle that I want to use, I use a big eye. Another thing that you can use is these dental floss things. They're made for dental floss, but I use them for threading ribbon through lace. Here's another product that I like to use. It's called Transweb. And there's a lot of products that are out there like this, but I particularly care for this one because, as you can see, it's really transparent and really flexible. And what you can do with this is you can iron this onto a piece of fabric, cut it out, and then iron it onto another. So you can make your own appliques, but I also like to use it for repairs. This was a beautiful piece of antique fabric, but it had a lot of holes in it. Here you can see them. So what I did was I took some material, this is called crepeline, but you could also possibly use a very fine silk chiffon, and as you can see, it's now stabilized because I ironed it on. It is a little more stiff, but it could now be used. Here's another tool that I like. These are embroiderer's scissors, but as you can see, they have a curve to them, and they're very sharp, and they're really good for clipping around edges and trimming. And they're from Kai Scissors, and we'll have that in our source for you. So today I'm going to demonstrate dyeing textiles, and what I'm going to be using are color Hue dyes. These dyes are wonderful for small items. They don't need any hot water. They don't need any kind of mordant or fixative. You dip it in and it's done. And I found that it's wonderful for a lot of different things. This was a piece of fabric that I had that I didn't quite like, you know, the look of it. So I dipped it in some turquoise dye, and as you can see, it just changes everything. So if you have a natural fiber that you want to change the look of, these dyes are perfect. I was reproducing a painting, and the pillow in the painting had blue fringe on it. So I took this cotton fringe and I dyed it and got this. Dyed beads. This was a beaded leaf that I had, and I dipped it in the blue dye. It changed the color of the beads and also the fabric that was underneath. In 2009, I made 365 of these little baby necklaces for a regional convention for UFDC, for the region here that I live in, to North. And I needed lots and lots of, I wanted to make them different. And it was really difficult for me to find all the same flowers, so I decided that I would just dye the flowers. So these are the petals. I bought a lot of 1950s cotton flowers, and I took them apart and dyed them. This is a picture of the 365 little flower baby necklaces that I made for UFDC. And as you can see, each one was a little different. Some piece of antique lace that I had, and I liked the acorn leaf part, so I cut it out and hand painted it with the dye, and then very carefully outlined and glued on a small thread of gold. This was an antique trim that I found, and I dyed it with by dipping and painting the dye onto. You can see where I got the tails from, and then also outlined it in silver thread. For my mermaids, I do a lot of dyeing. I take lace that looks like tails, and I will paint it with the dye. This is one that I did, and then this is a little box that has different tails that I've painted. They'll go on the mini mer babies. This is silk netting that I've dyed different colors. This is available through Thai Silk. And as you can see, this is one of my mini mer babies. This is the silk that I've dyed. There's an underneath of metallic textiles, and then this is one of the dyed tails, which is accented with little balls called micro beads and small Austrian crystals. This is a chart that just shows you some of the things that I did and that you can do by over dyeing. So I've used all this same color, which is the turquoise, and as you can see, you can get a variety of different looks just by dipping it in dye. The first thing that you want to do when you're dyeing is you want to make sure that your fabric doesn't have any grease, oil, or finishing like formaldehyde or whatever they finish the fabrics with. So Dharma Trading sells a product called Synthropol, which is a textile soap. I think that you could probably just use any soap, but I always use Synthropol. So these have been soaking, these are little pieces of fabric. They've been soaking in the Synthropol. And so now I'm just going to rinse them off and soak them. So you want to make sure that your fabric is soaked evenly and that it's clean. If not, you're going to end up with something like this, which is, as you can see, kind of blotchy, and the dye didn't take very well. So the reason that we soak the fabric is so that it's all wet and the dye will just absorb evenly into whatever you're dyeing. So today we're going to be learning about these dyes. They're called Color Hue Dyes. They're Insta-Set dyes, and I use them a lot. I think they were mainly started out in the ribbon embroidery world for people dyeing their own ribbons. But I use them for a lot of things. They come in 6 packs, 10 packs, and then you can buy these larger bottles. So when you're dyeing, you probably want to wear rubber gloves. I often don't, and I often have different color hands. But today, we'll use the rubber gloves soaked in Synthropol to clean out any excess grease or finishing that was on the fabric. And the way that these dyes work is that you take some water and you don't need a whole lot. The dyes are very concentrated, so they recommend using using 3 drops, 1 to 3. So 1 drop of dye to 3 drops of water. The dyes I find are really very concentrated and they're pretty bright. So a lot of times I'll mix the dyes, or I'll dye it one color and then dip it into another color. I find on dolls that a lot of the modern day fabrics and a lot of even the old fabrics are much too intense for a doll. You want your doll to shine through, not necessarily the fabric. So over dyeing, you can make it more subtle. When you're dyeing something, you want to use, if you have too bright a red, you want to use the opposite on the color wheel to mute it out. So if I had a red that I wanted to make softer, I would dip it in green dye. If I had orange, which we have some here, this to me is too intense for a doll. So in order to tone it down, I'm going to use some blue dye, which is the opposite of orange. So we'll start out with some blue. This dye is called electric blue. And I never pay attention to how much I'm putting in. I suppose if I was doing a lot, I might. And the way that this dye works is that it instantly absorbs into the fiber. So you want to make sure that it's stirred up really well. And well, let's take a piece of this. So this is from probably the 20s or 30s. It's a deco fabric with metallic in it. For me, it's too intense for one of my dolls. So I'm going to dip it in here You want to make sure that it absorbs all at once. And the longer you leave it in, the more intense the color is going to get. So we're going to take it out, and you'll see that it really goes right into the fabric. If I put it into the water, you can see that there's hardly any dye that comes out. And we've taken it down a lot. So it's not a bright orange anymore. It's much more subtle. And it always will dry lighter. It looks dark now, but by the time it's dry, it'll be lighter. So I'm going to do some ribbons. They're in here somewhere. So these are silk ribbons. I buy the silk on a spool because I use a lot of them. So I'm going to dip it in the dye, and I'm going to leave it in till it gets pretty intense. And then I'm going to take it out and spread it out to dry. But what I want to show you is that each time you dip the fabric in, it'll be lighter. So you can do a whole kind of ombre effect. See how much lighter the second one is? Somewhere there's a third piece in here. Oops, and this one will be, well, it's pretty much the same color, but you get the idea. Each time you put it in, it's a little lighter. So, let's, so I have this plaid, which is a little intense. I mean, it's a nice plaid, but let's see what it looks like when we put it in our blue. So we're going to stir it around in the blue. We're going to leave that in for a few seconds. You might have to add a little more blue. As you can see that each time you dye with the dye, it absorbs the dye. So I think our dye is getting a little weak. I'm going to add a little more blue to it. You want to make sure that you stir it up really well. And we'll put it back in. So now it's much more intense. We'll rinse it a little. As you can see, hardly anything comes off. And once this dries, we'll be able to see that it's settled it out a little. It's the blue has been absorbed by the white color, and it's a little darker. We're going to try the same thing with this metallic silk. It's a really pretty color the way that it is, but let's see how it looks when we put it in the blue dye. So you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of wrinkles. Remember tie-dye? Well, tie-dye is the way that you get different areas to resist. So you want to make sure that your fabric all goes in evenly and not crumpled up, or you'll have a tie-dye effect, which is okay, but not for this purpose. So you can see that now we have a totally different look from what we started with. fabrics in yellow. Well, actually, it's called goldenrod. So, I'm going to put the dye in. And you can keep these dyes if you don't use them all up in one sitting. They don't last a really long time, but they will keep a little bit if you put a top on them. So, we're going to stir it up. When you buy the dyes, you get some of these pipettes for dropping your drops of dye in. So let's try this. So remember that fabric that I was told was a natural fiber, but the ball, when we burned it, burned hard. So let's just see if it'll dye. Let's try the blue. So it does dye. So it must have some natural fiber in it. So you can't always tell, but it's going to dye pretty light because there is some synthetic in it, as we found out from the, but there's your blue. So now we're going to try these same fabrics in a different dye, just so that we can see the difference that we can get by using different dyes. So we're going to take the orange fabric and we're going to put it in the yellow dye, which is probably going to intensify the orange. So there you have it. And now it's gone to a much warmer look. And we're going to do the same with our plaid. And as you can see, it doesn't have to sit in the dye a really long time to work. It's pretty instant. And so now the white that was in the plaid has become much more yellow. And it's kind of good to know your colors and your color wheel, because I know that what is going to happen, you know, that this blue with the orange is going to make it be more brown, and with the yellow it's going to intensify the orange. So we have one more piece here. We have this piece of metallic silk. We're going to unrumple it. And we're going to dip it in the dye and swirl it around. And this one should come out a lot greener, which it did. So there you have what you can do with your dye. For my mermaid tails, which we saw earlier, I get a lot of these lace samples from Jennifer Osner. She'll be on your source list. She bought up a lace company many years ago, and these are probably from the 20s and 30s. So I've soaked my lace, and I'm just going to take it. I take it directly out of the bottle, and I just start painting with the dye onto the different motifs that I want to use. And as you can see, you can blend it. So you could use these on your dolls any way that you want. You could do lace trim on your dolls. And this will just dry once it's dry, you can cut out the motifs that you've painted. Oops. So this brown is not very lovely. I've got the yellow and blue dyed fabrics on top of their original fabrics, and you can see what a difference you can get just by a little bit of dye. You may have noticed that I have this piece of foam covering part of my work table. This foam is called Ectofoam, and it's not the kind of foam that you get in packaging, although it seems like more and more people are using it. And I also use it to package my dolls, but the reason that it's on my table is that I can pin into it. I can put, pin ribbon and work on it. I can do braiding with hair. Also, because my dolls are porcelain, if I'm working on my dolls and I drop something, it's not going to have as high an impact on the foam as it would on the tabletop. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about velvets. This is cotton velveteen, and it's pretty thick, although if your dolls are bigger, the scale is fine. What I prefer to use is silk velvet because it's a lot thinner. You can see how fluid it is and how fine the nap on it is. A lot of times the nap on velvets is like too heavy for a doll. This would look like a rug on a doll. I just wanted to talk about a few sources for textiles that I haven't mentioned already. These are samples from Dharma Trading. Dharma is actually a mile down the road here from my house. When I was in art school, I used to order for Dharma, so they've been in business for a very long time. They carry all different fabrics made for dyeing. They also carry a variety of dyes. They carry jacquard dyes, and they carry acid dyes. So if you want to really get into exploring dyeing, Dharma is the place to go for dyes, and they have a wonderful catalog. In their online catalog and also in their print catalog, they really talk about a lot of the different dyes and how to use them. So it's worth checking them out. Okay, so as you can see, they have all different kinds of silk. They have habati, they have crepe silk de chine. So, and these all dye beautifully. This is from a place called Thai Silks, which is also in California, but a little farther away than Dharma. And this is a silk and cotton blend, and it's just lovely. Another fabric that Thai Silks carries is this cotton and silk fabric that has sparkles on it. So you can see there's silver and there's gold sparkles, and especially if you're doing fantasy or fairies, it's wonderful. These are some pieces that I've dyed. You can see how well it takes the dye. So they will be in your source list too. So thank you for coming and joining me today. I've enjoyed telling you all about fabrics, and I hope that something here will be helpful in your next doll project.